Hi, Courtney. How are you?
Hey, how are you, Mark?
I'm doing well. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Finally.
Yeah, this is exciting. Where are you from, Courtney?
I'm from Wisconsin, but I'm
Oh,
living in Nebraska now.
oh, okay. I
Yeah.
love I love Wisconsin. Um, they have great cheese, and I love the accent. I don't hear a Wisconsin accent from you.
Um, you might catch it. It comes out sometimes.
Okay, because I'm like, oh yeah, let's go to
Oh, yeah.
Grandpa's Cheese Barn and get some squeakers. Oh yeah, like the, um,
You might hear that. I do the oh yeah sometimes, but
good. That's fantastic. I love it. What prompted the move to Nebraska?
my husband is actually going to school at the university now.
Oh, okay. And what is
So
he studying?
he's studying music. So
Oh,
he's
like
actually going for his doctorate in saxophone.
wow, a doctorate. That's awesome. Um, and what does he want to do with that? Does he want to perform? Does he want to teach?
He wants to teach.
Okay, at the university level.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, wow. Well, that's excellent. How far along is he into his PhD program?
This is his last semester, so he's almost
Ah,
there.
nice. Now, does he have to do like a dissertation, or is it more of a performance, or does he have to write music as his dissertation? How does that work?
So he'll have to do a dissertation, and then he also has to do a lecture recital. So he's always had to do recitals pretty much every semester, but this last one is more talking about the piece and how to perform it, things like that, and then
Okay.
um, the dissertation on top of that.
And the
So it's a bit.
dissertation is the performance itself as the actual piece of music, or is he doing like a academic theory and those kinds of things?
It's it could be essentially whatever you want it to be. It does have to be a full paper. The performance is just completely separate,
Okay.
but he's doing his on one piece of music and breaking down like three different movements and how to perform them and the different elements of it.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. Well, fantastic. Why choose the University of Nebraska as a place to go for the PhD?
We went to a couple of different schools, and a lot of times with music, well, I'm sure everywhere at the doctoral level, you
Hmm.
want to know your professor and your advisor
Sure.
specifically because that's who you're going to be working with.
Hmm.
And so he met with his saxophone professor, and they got along really well. So um, that's kind of that kind of connection really
Yeah.
pulled you in, I think.
It makes a huge difference. It really does
Mhm.
at that level because you're going to be working so intimately, and at the PH level, you're not quite, but almost peers, and so that's important to have that. Awesome. Immediately, some things came to mind, and I don't know if your husband would appreciate these or not, but is he gonna go by like he's gotta somewhere say like Dr. Sachs. I mean, you just
Oh,
have to put that a tattoo or a sticker or something after he gets his PhD. He's got to celebrate that in some like fantastic way like that.
well, he's got a funny. He said everyone has to call him Dr. Lillard at least once.
Okay,
Everyone,
yes.
family, friends,
Right.
whoever.
Yes, that's the reason to get a PhD. You can lord it over
Oh,
everyone. That's right.
oh.
Nice. Excellent. Um, yeah, I would think if if I were doing one, knowing my sense of humor would come in. Have you seen the movie The Lost Boys about the
Hmm.
vampires? There's that
Yep.
scene we get the saxophone player. He's all muscular and all greased up. Like you have to bring that into the thesis somewhere, somehow,
Yeah.
you know, even as like this is the perception of saxophone players.
You
Um,
know, I wonder how much they hear those things.
right.
The
Yes.
pop culture.
Right. Because I think I'm trying to remember other saxophone players, Kenny G, and then Clarence Clemens, and the saxophone guy from Lost Boys. That's like the only three saxophone players I know. Oh, and the song Baker Street. I don't know who played
Oh
saxophone in
yeah.
that song, but said that yeah, I remember that being like really big in popular culture. Like everyone I knew like wanted to learn how to play saxophone just to play that riff.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Well, kudos to your husband for going through that program. That's really wonderful.
Thank you.
So do you like Nebraska, being out in the big prairie, the corn state?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of corn, but it's a very nice, quieter place, quieter state, because we've been all over too. We went to school in Illinois and lived there, and then, like I said, I'm from Wisconsin. He's from Missouri. Not the cities there, but a very small town. So we've kind of been both in bigger places and then the smaller. So Lincoln's actually one of the bigger places, but it's very spread out, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah,
so
like Milwaukee is. Milwaukee is kind of like
yep,
that. Yes.
yep, just like that. So
Yeah.
it's nice. It's familiar too.
Well, good. Well, that's great.
Mhm.
That's great.
Thank
Well, if you are ready, we can get right into the show, if that's all right with you.
Yep, sounds good.
Excellent. Hey, this is Mark Justice, and welcome back to Between the Lines. Tonight's show is going to be a lot of fun. I'd like to introduce Courtney Lillard. Courtney is a fantasy writer, and we're going to have a lot of fun together. So, Courtney, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Um, I love doing this show because I get to meet so many interesting writers. And I was looking over at your books, and I like that you write fantasy. And I have friends who write fantasy, and every writer I get to talk to, I am just amazed at things about their creative process. So I'm really excited to kind of dig into all these things. But let's kind of go back to a big picture question, something from like maybe childhood. Growing up, who were your favorite writers?
Definitely, I think when I started beginning fantasy, it was Mercedes Lackey.
Okay.
And I actually specifically remember when I picked up her book, and what drew me in, it was her Take a Thief book. And if you're not familiar with her series, she uses, they're essentially spirits in the form of horses, and white horses specifically. And I remember seeing on the side cover, they had the white horse on there, and I pulled it out, and then I kind of took a look. And so that pulled me in, and I started reading her books, and she has, I mean, dozens of books too. So I have a collection on my bookshelf of just her books. So that, first and foremost, she drew me in. I also liked reading Christopher Palin with the Aragon series.
Oh, okay.
So
That's the dragon, right?
yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I remember seeing those. Yes.
They were popular and they had a movie and everything. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, they were very entertaining, and stick with me. I have that series as well. And I also like just kind of the classics too. I think I'm more of a classics reader now than a fantasy reader. I still have a whole lot of books to read still, but I do like Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park book as general fiction. That's one of my favorites. I've been getting into a lot of different books. I've read The Last Unicorn. I have The Princess Bride sitting on my nightstand. So just a few different ones that I want to explore.
Yeah. I found The Last Unicorn. It was a novel I had to read actually when I was in undergrad. I was taking a fantasy literature course, and I wasn't really pleased that we were reading The Last Unicorn. You know, when there was so much other fantasy out there, I was like, come on. But I had a crush on our teacher, so I'm like, okay, I'll let her pick the Last Unicorn. So
That'll do it.
That'll do it. I was like, yeah, that's fine. You know, yeah, that's funny. And I remember reading a Princess Bride book because I love the movie. I mean, it's just one of those perfect movies, and noticing how different the novel is in a lot of ways. So I think I'm not sure. I don't want to spoil anything for you. It's just different, and so yeah. So, so some of the classics like Jurassic Park. Did you like the novel compared to the movie, or did you like the novel better or the movie better?
I personally like the novel better, and I can get into this because I grew up loving dinosaurs and
Nice.
Paleontology and everything. So I actually read that book my senior year of high school because it was required
Really?
reading. project.
Interesting. Wow. That's
And
that's amazing. Who passed that? Someone must have been a huge dinosaur fan. Like, yeah, let's make the kids read that one. I bet that would have been a tough sell for everybody.
well, yeah, right. You wouldn't think about reading that, but it was a very interesting experience because our teacher had to split us up into groups. So every group of 2 or 3 people had a book, and then you did a presentation on it. And they
Okay.
had a list of books that you could choose. And I remember looking at it and just thinking, none of these really stick out. It was I know Catcher in the Rye was
Oh,
one.
good for the
And I had
school.
just kind
I
of
mean,
the
yeah,
classics. Yeah.
yeah, because that book is banned in a lot of schools. I mean, sadly,
Mhm.
books are being banned. I mean, it's like we're
Oh,
living in Nazi Germany or something. But
right.
yeah, Catcher in the Rye is one of those seminal books that I think every teenager needs to read.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
well, kudos to your school. So when you saw Jurassic Park, you're like,
I'm
that's the one.
like, movie. I know I can do this. And it's
Fantastic.
it's more graphic,
Mhm.
much more graphic. But just talking about books compared to movie, I mean, the movie does fantastic with the CGI, but then you look at the story side of it. I mean, the book just is so much better in that regard. But I enjoyed them both.
Yeah. I what was your presentation on that you had to do for Jurassic Park? If you
Oh, I think
remember.
it was the book summary. It
Oh, okay.
wasn't anything
Okay.
fancy.
Yeah. I was just thinking I would probably have done something like um, go into graphic detail about each of the dinosaurs and the kind of damage they would do
Oh,
to
yeah.
a human body. How many pounds of pressure. And I would
Not
probably get the whole
specific
like
thing.
the teacher be like, okay, Mark Allen, just like my mom or grandma. Um, that's wonderful. That's fantastic. Good for your school. So you obviously love reading. You have the stack of books that you want to get to. There's something magical, to that. The reading, I think, is one of the best gifts that a child can receive. Um, I was read to from infancy, maybe the womb, and could read before I went to kindergarten. And
Oh,
so I'm like in kindergarten, and the kids were like learning our ABCs. I'm like, why aren't these kids like, why don't they know how to read? And
oh
so
God.
so it's just something that and it just spurred my love for reading as just a voracious reader as a kid. And um classics like, well, a lot of H.G. Wells and those kinds of science fiction classics, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and the horror stuff is what appealed to me. So
That's great.
and but yeah, reading, there's just something magical about that, and getting a new book and being able to like just fall into it. Yeah.
For sure.
So what first made you want to be a writer, or what first drew you to writing?
I'd have to go back. It's been at least a decade since I started coming up with ideas. And I had always had ideas. I actually thought about going into animation just because, the visual storytelling of it appealed to me. And I didn't even think about putting those ideas together until I started college. And I kind of wrote here and there in my notebook during class sometimes, in my free time, anytime.
Sure.
And it really picked up when I graduated. I graduated from Western Illinois University with my master's degree in communication studies. And after I graduated, my husband still had another year because we both went to school there. We both started together, but he had an extra year. So anyway, I finished first, and then I had all this free time. I'd been working here and there just to kind of fill the time. But I really didn't have too much to do in my free time. And so I thought, well, that's something I enjoyed. And I started reading because I had all this time, and that's great when you have time to read all that you
Yes.
want.
Right.
So I started writing, and I actually started writing what's going to be the 4th book of the series that I'm writing now, which is called the Dark Angel series. And I started at the very end and then went back to the beginning and started writing from the first book on. Well, I didn't actually think about publishing it until we moved to Nebraska a couple years later. And I thought, well, why not publish it? Why not try? And it had always been something on my bucket list to publish a book and just kind of put something out in the world. And that's really when I fell in love, when you get to the editing and go through it with a fine-tooth comb and realize that you kind of have something great, something that fits together. And it really is a confidence booster too, and you have a great support system with you.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you're touching on things that I definitely want to talk about, which is exciting since you're already there. So yeah, I understand that process and how thrilling it can be, and that's interesting that you focus on the revision as when it was exciting for you. Because and I as someone who I understand the importance of revision, but it's not nearly as exciting as like the generation process. So no, that's what I love doing about the show is finding everyone, and every writer is got such a different way of looking at things, and their process is different, but we all kind of end at the same place. And
Sure.
that's what I find uniquely fascinating. And so I'm just thrilled to learn all this. So,
I'm sure I'm an outlier in that too. I'm sure nobody likes the editing revision part.
well, I don't know, because you said the way you said it was this is where you see things kind of come together, and you often don't know what you have until you've written it. It's just like you kind of you're pouring your sand into the box, but you don't really necessarily how the shape is really fine-tuned in that revision process. And so no, I kind of get that, because then if you're objective enough, and if you give it enough time and distance between your draft and your revision, then you kind of see what you were trying to do, and you see how far or how short you came of your perfect vision. And then when you can put that more perfect aspect up, and fine tune it to make it closer to what you want. Now that is very satisfying. It's just sometimes you just get that when you see how much you have to rewrite, it's like it can be defeating in a way.
Oh
but
yeah.
but yes, but when you approach it as like, I'm making this better, and hopefully making it better,
Mhm.
no, I totally get that. I get that. It's just not a fun process, but it's a necessary process.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what made you want to write fantasy as a genre as opposed to like general fiction, or the next Jurassic Park or anything like that?
Well, I've thought about delving into different genres maybe in the future. But I think fantasy has just had the most impact on me growing up. So I had always had these ideas in my head. And this is the first series that I started, or the first series of books. And so at the time, it was more of, well, let's just get it down on paper and see how it sounds, how it looks. And once I started, then you just keep going and going, and it picks up a little bit. So I do have some different ideas. I think I'm also more familiar with fantasy. Like I said, I grew up with it, not only through books, but also through media as well. So through movies or through video games, especially,
Hmm.
you just kind of pick up on those, and that becomes familiar. That's what you're more comfortable delving into, as opposed to if I did start writing general fiction, then you'd have to know, okay, different, it has to be a little more accurate, especially with anything that's placed in the real world, in the modern
Right,
world.
right.
You have to
Yes.
take a lot more into account, whereas fantasy, you make it up as you go, and it works.
Yeah, you have to do as opposed to you know doing research,
Mm.
which often happens with writing. So that's good. And I don't know about you, I find myself, when books come out, I see people writing these novels that are about subject matters that I would just never want to read about, like drama,
Right.
relationships, things like that. Because I've always been a genre reader, and give me the something, the scary, the spooky, the fun, the
Mhm.
fantasy, And I'm like, how on earth would you write this multi-generational book about family dysfunction? Like, God, that just sounds so, and these relationships. And as a creative person, I'm like, or as a consumer, I'm like, it's just like the furthest thing from. But what I've noticed, my first series is a cozy mystery series, which I never would have written had it's just not something I would normally have worked in.
Mhm.
But the second book in that, it's a 4-book series based on the seasons. This one is the spring book, and I'm using Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a character arc. And so the main character started at the bottom. She had lost her job, and now now her needs have been met. So she's moving up in this next book to where she's doing the whole like connections to other people and relationships and belonging and where do I fit in all this. And it's a messy kind of thing. And I find myself like writing the very thing that as a reader I would be like, Mark, what the hell are you doing writing this relationship stuff? Because she's just overthinking, and I'm trying to show the ugly middle. The
Yeah.
beginning's nice and the ending's always nice, but the middle is like, eh. Um, and I had to laugh at myself, like, you would never read this, would you? I'm like, no, but it's going to be fun writing it, and just shut up.
Maybe you doing it too, and not what you would perceive other people would make it out too. So I don't know. Maybe that's a part of it.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's because when I came up with the story, I knew it had to be more than just the basic story, because there's no murder in these books. There's no bloodshed.
Okay.
There are mysteries. There's an
Mhm.
ongoing kind of connection between all 4 books. Um, but it really, because the town and the characters are all, I think, part of the charm of the book. Small town, and
Mhm.
I wanted to tell their stories. And since the the concept of the whole series is called Seasons Change, this aspect of sometimes change is thrust upon us, and it's uncomfortable to change, and it doesn't always feel good, but at the end of the day, the change can be good, can get us out of our ruts and things that we weren't even aware of that we were in. And so that's the themes that I'm working with. And so it's about people being pushed out in some way, to confront things that need to be changed. Because that's something I've always hated and resisted against. Like, don't make me change. So I think it's kind of fun for me, like, it's therapeutic to write all this stuff out. But
Right.
but I have to laugh at myself, because I know I'm writing something that I would otherwise never probably want to read, that aspect of that.
Mhm.
But so I don't know. Have you ever felt that way as a writer? Like, you find yourself writing things that your reader self would probably say, I don't know if I would get this.
But sometimes I do. The biggest thing that I struggle with is romantic relationships, because that's just something I never care for reading, because
Yes.
it's so a lot of it is just so bloated or over the top or dramatic. And
Right.
one of the examples, um, with a Throne of Glass, Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series. That's one of the where they have the love triangle between the action, and it's great that you have the character development, but when it spans 7 books, and I
Someone make a decision, piss or get off the pot, right? Someone.
exactly, and you get more people introduced, and then more
Oh,
relationships, and it just
the triangle
that's
becomes an octagon. Then we're
exactly.
getting interesting, right? Okay.
And some people find that interest, and that's great. If you enjoy that, I recommend
Right.
it.
Sure.
But I one of the thing, and I get this too from family and friends who have read the book and feel comfortable, or my books, and feel comfortable bringing up
Hmm.
the relationships that I don't specifically say, or I might hint
Hmm.
at them, but they're more personal relationships, because I believe that's more realistic,
Sure.
just from my point of view.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm writing the 6th book, and there are romantic relationships, and so
Oh.
it's it's I don't know, I haven't read them, and the ones that I have read, I don't believe they're realistic. So I try and base it off of what I consider a healthy, or I guess not always healthy, but what I consider romantic relationships to be as realistic as possible. So that's one thing I'm interested to see when the beta readers go through it, or
Mhm.
again, family and friends. But I
Sure.
get that a lot of, oh, they're going to end up together, right? Or, oh, they dance together,
Yeah,
so they're shipping them, and
yes.
shrug and
And
roll your eyes.
yes, yes. Um, yes, it's very it's very gratifying in one way and rewarding and humbling that people have invested so much into the characters you created.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's surprising. I did like a book club with some friends who read, because my book is based on the town I grew up in Ohio.
Okay.
And so a lot of the people who still live there or have connections there, they like in my class from my high school, like in mass, like bought this book and had like this book club meeting, which I thought was so
Oh,
sweet,
really?
And they were talking like, I remember this place because all the places are geographically where they would be in the town,
Oh
and
wow.
yeah, so it's kind of like all my memories of growing up there are through the main character, like the soda shop where she goes to get her phosphates that has been around since like the 1920s. It's like
Oh my
still there,
gosh.
Yeah.
That's
So,
amazing.
oh, sorry, you're breaking up.
Oh, I said that's amazing. That's
Oh,
great.
thank you. Yeah, because my mom went there when she was a kid, and I went there when I was a kid. So that memory is still very present. And so, of course, my main character is going to have to go and get a phosphate, 'cause, um, so for them, this was very much identifiable, and for people who grew up in a small towns, very identifiable. But
Hmm.
what I notice is the main character she has a, a, a lifelong friend. They met when they were like 10. His name is Ray, and they just are like the best buddies, and they have this good time, and he teases her. They tease one another, but there's like
Hmm.
nothing like romantic or sexual at all. But that teasing has been interpreted to be flirtation by a lot of
Sure.
people, and just like your experience at the book club meeting, and I've heard other people writing me saying, so when are Ray and Abby gonna get together? you know
Oh yeah.
and I start laughing. I go, what? They go, yeah, obviously he's flirting with her. And I'm like, and in my mind, I'm like, I'm, I'm bringing him, all my romance would be like something that H.P. Lovecraft would write. Have you read Lovecraft at all?
Mm-mm.
Okay. He's a horror writer from the 20s
Mhm.
and 30s. And his romance usually happens like if there's a sexual union between people, it usually ends up in like deformity, or cannibals, things like that. It's not going to work out. And so um, I was just like stunned because the relationship that I was trying to capture was like the kind that I had, like more of a familial, like with my cousins. There's a lot of
Okay.
love and teasing and joking. And that was the memories that I was bringing to this relationship. And I've had a lot of friends, women who are friends, and it's a loving relationship, but it's not romantic or sexual. And so for me, it was like, it, obviously they can be friends, what's wrong with that? Um, but because they were so adamant about like, you're going to get together, right? And I keep on saying, no, they're not. They're going, no, no, they will. I'm like, so now I'm like, okay, I have to play with this, knowing that people
Oh
want
yeah.
this. And so I am totally like making Abby like something happens that causes her to go, do I have feelings for Ray? A normal, I would never have done that had it not been for that audience, that reader response. Because now I'm like, oh, I can just, I can just twist it here and have fun. Is that wrong?
That's interesting. That's interesting though, to get that feedback and say, oh, people are interested in that, or it could happen.
Mhm, right. And my explanations didn't satisfy them. I'm like, I'm the writer. I know what's going to happen. No, I think they're going to be together at the end. I'm like, oh,
Oh.
no, they're not. But okay, thank you. No, um, no, that's great. I I'm glad I'm not the only one getting feedback like you're getting from people who are honest to tell you what they think of the book and to show that they're committed. That is a deeply wonderful feeling and surprising, and gratifying. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it leaves me feeling very grateful that someone would spend money to buy my book and read it and
Mhm.
then tell me what they think, um, without flipping me off. So, I mean, they could do that too. I'd be fine with that. At least it's honest, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
true.
Um, what makes a good fantasy story to you?
Mhm. That's an interesting question because a lot of times it either follows a system or it doesn't, or one element of the story weighs more heavily than the others. So I think a lot of it is based on your personal preference for books. So, like we just mentioned, for me, romance isn't so big, but I think character relationships are huge with the books, whether or not you like the characters, as long as they have some sort of development, as long as they have relationships with other characters. I think it's funny because a lot of people told me they don't like the protagonist in my first book. And I said, well, just give it a little bit because you
Yeah,
have to have something. You can't have it all happen, in the
right.
blink of an eye. They have this character
Yes,
development. So
right.
I think I think that's one of the more important aspects of any story, whether it's fantasy or horror or anything specific to fantasy. I think you have to have some sort of magical element, just because it
Hmm.
differentiates fantasy from just general fiction, definitely from nonfiction.
Yeah, even magical
And
realism is fantasy to a
yep,
degree if you're taking it like that, which is an interesting genre in its of itself. When magical realism, it seems like an oxymoron. But there is something to that. That
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Do you like the tropes? Which are the tropes that you like about fantasy that you wanted to bring into your books, and which ones did you want to avoid?
a lot of the ones that I bring in, I find, I don't know how familiar you are with video games. This is the
Mhm.
best comparison
I,
I can make.
I
But
like video games. I've been
okay,
playing for a long time. I had an Atari 2600, so yeah.
oh,
But I'm not
so
much
you're
up on
an
like
expert.
I'm an old school video game player, and I played Space Invaders at the arcade. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, I
Uh,
know. Um, but I'm aware of games, but I haven't played anything. I'm aware of like stuff that's out there but I haven't really played a good video game. Probably, I think I stopped at like Resident Evil 3 and Silent Hill 2, and it's just something I just haven't done very much of lately.
sure. Well, if you're familiar with the Final Fantasy
Oh
series,
yeah, yeah.
um, I took a lot of inspiration as far as the mages go, which is also some interesting feedback I got back too. In my story, there's light and dark mages that wield light and dark magic, but they work in tandem with each other. Um, and I had a couple people tell me when they read through it that it was interesting how, light mages, you would think, oh, they're the good guys, and then dark
Hmm.
mages, oh, they're the bad guys. And to me, that just didn't make any sense because I'm so used to the video games where they work together, where you play as those characters. So that was one that was interesting. I don't know if you would consider it a trope
Hmm.
specifically, but I think one that is interesting that I haven't delved into and I would like to in the future, it's just something I never considered, would be the introduction of magical creatures.
Okay.
So you would think that's something that is, well, it is specific to fantasy,
Like
but
like
something that
by magical creature, you mean like ogres and trolls and werewolves, or are you talking about
yeah,
like um dragons and such? Or is it all
all
the
all
same?
of it,
All of it. Okay.
all of it. Mhm.
Okay.
So I guess creature wise, race wise, anything
Elves and
relating to
all those
those.
kinds of things.
Mhm.
Okay,
Right.
interesting. Okay.
I have different ideas for different series, but for this one specifically,
Mhm.
it's not something considered. It was very human grounded, character driven.
Mhm.
Um, but not creature. No, there are no dragons or unicorns or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's one that I didn't specifically stay away from it, but I think once I realized I didn't have it, I didn't want to shoehorn in any sort of,
Right.
okay, well, I don't have anything, so throw it in for the, for the crowd so that they have
Yes.
something, some sort of creature in there. Um,
Right. It was kind of like
those are
Game of
the two.
Thrones in a way. Game of Thrones had the dragons, but those were so removed from the fantastical, and the walkers, but it was still a human drama, with
Right.
fantastic elements in the periphery.
Right. So I think that's something that, like I said, I would like to
Hmm.
explore more in the future, especially since a lot of the books that I do enjoy in the fantasy series have those elements. So it just kind of blows my mind, honestly, thinking about how I never thought about including any sort
Right.
of, whether it's a sidekick or a different race or anything like that.
Sure.
But those are the two that come to mind.
Okay. No, that's great. I mean, for writing character-driven stories, that's what takes over, and that
Mhm.
becomes the setting is it could be the fantastic, and the characters are grounded in that world, and in their real, the reality has elements of magic or something in them. And I like that you were kind of playing with this idea of the good and the bad wizards, because I think it's more of really a matter of perspective, you know.
Mhm.
And back in the day when I was in college, I knew some witches, and they invited me to their coven, just to see, and these were like very, I would consider like the Wiccan kind of white
Okay.
witchcraft. And I just was curious, just to see. Having growing and left like the church and trying to get away from Christianity, I was like, let's taste it all, um,
Yeah.
and yeah, why not? And what I found is I saw also, to me, that wasn't impressive. They were, they could have the crystals and the rocks, and nothing against their belief. I was just trying to find something more, I guess, like intense. Like I want to shoot fire out my hands. Who can do that for me? Like that kind of magic. Because I watched the movie Warlock with Julian Sands. I'm like, I want to do that. And then I saw some witches who were on the other side. They were considered themselves doing black magic, and um, what I found out is that the white witches didn't like the black, not color, race, just the white magicians didn't like the ones who practiced black magic, um, because they were evil. And then the ones who practiced black magic thought that the white witches were hypocrites because they were all doing magic, And I just found that relationship and that antagonism from the different perspectives to be just kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I I'd never considered that, before. So that's
Oh,
great, you know.
interesting.
Yeah. So not saying that you have to take that, but the fact that you kind of play with that's what reminded me of it's not what you would expect the response to be from these groups.
Right.
And so okay, well, going back to your writing and your fantasy, the act of writing, how do you know when you've written something fantastic? The idea of the fantastic or fantasy. Is there a moment when you're writing something where you go, yeah, that's what I'm looking for?
I think so. My process a lot of the time, like I said, I've spent at least a decade just with these ideas sitting in my head, and music is a huge influence on my writing. A lot of times I can just listen to music, sit on an idea and just let it play on repeat in my head and build on that story. So to me, it's almost like I have everything set up in my head before I sit down to write. And in those moments, it makes writing so much easier because then I run into writer's block sometimes, but it helps avoid that when you know what you want to write and what you want the scene to be. And so after I finish a scene and I feel like I was able to put everything down clearly to where I can envision it, and where I feel like I got all of the information, all that I wanted out of it, that's personally when I feel like it reaches that point.
Okay. So it sounds like going into, you said you've had these thoughts, you've been thinking about them, developing them. Your organization then, it,
Mhm.
it sounds like you are a plotter in that regard,
Yeah.
or so how do you organize when you write things down? Is it just an idea and then you kind of flesh it out like a lister does? Do you draw it out on a paper, like all the things that you want to do and like show the relationships? Are you a visual kind of planner, or what is your process to organization?
I'm very much an outliner. When I sit down, I'll have different, because it has the perspective switches. So I will write down one perspective, write down just a paragraph or two of the next perspective, just so I have a general idea. And it's not too detailed, but if there's something that I don't have in my head, or that I don't characterize with that specific scene, I can put it down so I won't forget it.
Hmm. And sometimes you don't know what you're missing until you're writing. Like you
Mhm.
think you have an outline that covers all the bases, and then you realize when you're writing, like, oh, that's an idea I've not come across. Or you think of something new, you're allowed, you go on those tangents as you write.
Yeah.
Um, okay, that's marvelous. The last couple writers I've talked to have been all pantsers, and so I'm glad that I could take a break now with someone who plots. I feel really good because in my plotting and organizing like that, I'm a lister,
Mhm.
and an
Okay.
outliner. Came from years of academia and teaching English composition and being a student also. And the academic writing, as your husband knows, you have to have a orderly, cogent or order and
Yep.
coherent
Yep.
thesis and paper. And I always brought that into. It was a natural, very organic for me to bring that into my process when I started
Mhm.
writing my long fiction. And so, and it starts off with just a basic idea, and then as ideas come, I just write them down, and then when you feel like you have enough pieces, then you start putting them into an order. And then
Yeah.
that's when I start seeing gaps, like, okay, I need something more here. What could I do?
Yeah.
And then by the time my outline is done, like how long is your typical outline? Like for your, like
Oh,
when it's finished?
it ranges between usually like 3 or 4 pages. Because I'll just do what's
It's the
next.
major
Won't write out
parts,
the
right?
whole book. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I find my outlines getting longer with the long books. Like the one
Yeah.
I'm doing now, the second of the Cozy series, my outline's like 20, 23 pages, 26 pages, something like that. Color coded, but it also has like big chunks of dialogue and in it too from that I've written. That I could just like transfer over into that scene. But yeah, it's interesting. No, I like that because no matter how much of an outline you have, even though people gasp like, oh, 26 pages. I said, but yeah, but that still doesn't, you still have to put word after word after word,
Yep.
to kind of get from point A to B to C, all the way through a chapter or a section. You still have to kind of build that wall slowly. And that's where all that discovery happens, as you write.
Right. And do you write are you beginning to end, or do you write different parts and put them in together?
Well, before I start drafting, I write different parts. Sometimes I'll know the end. I'll know things, and I'll do as much as I can. All the pre-writing finally ends up into the form of the outline, and then when I start finally like drafting, I start from the beginning and work my way through.
Okay.
And because it helps me to keep something that I'm building towards, and it keeps my mind like, okay, here's what I just wrote, and here's what's going to happen in this chapter. And so I sometimes will try to make the connections or continue the thought, because all the books I write, at least for the Cozy series, take place in a week's time. So I had to go every day, the things that happen, and try to crunch in
Mhm.
this incredible personal journey, as well as like solving this mystery, and introducing a bunch of new characters, and all these things. I'm like, man, maybe it's just not enough time, because I'm like cramming like 15 things into a week. Like, God, that's just too many things going on, um, into this magical week.
Yeah.
uh, right. So yeah, but once I start writing, it's beginning to end.
Okay.
And yeah, and that's because then I feel like I can since I know how it's going to end, I can do those kind of breadcrumbs and the foreshadowing more
Mhm.
successfully than realizing something happened. Like, oh, how do I go backtrack and then do something 3 chapters before that will suggest what's going to happen later? You know?
Right.
Yeah, and so
Right.
it's just that's just how it feels better for me. Yeah,
Okay.
but thank you for asking.
Sure.
Let's talk about the concept of world building. You've created this fantasy place, and it's a character-driven fiction, but these characters have to have a world to live in. So, how do you go about designing your world?
I think world building is one of the things that I'm trying to work on. Because frankly, I don't go into it with the world in mind. So I talk about how I have the plot, I have the characters and everything, different scenes in my head, but I don't think of the wider world. So when I started with the first book, it actually, I think my style or my process of world building is branching out as the story progresses or as the books continue. So the first book takes place in partly the magical academy, partly in the capital city and the palace there. And so that's the first book. The second book is more in the capital city and exploring that, and then exploring one of the military bases that's to the south, some of the towns along the way. And then by the third book, the protagonist is exploring the whole country, and it just sort of branches out from there. I think a lot of how I do it is based on what I know. I've realized that I formed the country sort of like the United States in shape wise. And then with a country to the north, that gets explored more in the fifth and the sixth book. So it just expands. So it's not set up right away. And that's one of the things that I'd like to play with, because I don't, um, as far as drawing people in, I know a lot of people, you want that right away. You
Mhm.
want everything explained and described to you
Sure.
instead of slowly peeling back what the world is like.
Right.
Um,
You get to know the world as the characters do, because it sounds like you're developing parts of the world as needed, and
right.
the
Yeah.
reader's kind of getting that. So do you have like a map in your books? Like, every fantasy book has to have a map, right? Like, here's the
Right.
world.
Right. I have one designed. I just haven't put it into the books yet.
Sure.
I'd like to get it professionally. I've tried doing the
Mm.
sites or by hand, and it doesn't look as good as it probably could. So,
Mhm. There
uh,
are some programs for that. Like, if you ever want to try it, like, there's a couple map drawing programs like Campaign Cartographer for people who do like role-playing games, and you can produce some really lovely maps that are like old style, like, look like it's drawn on parchment and things like that. So that's just an option if, for you.
I've tried. What is? I think it's like ink cart or ink something with ink. But it's like one of those programs, but it
Okay.
just, there's so much to it that I feel like I'd have to sit down and
Yeah, there's
learn
a
how to
learning
do it
curve.
more.
Yes,
And yeah, so
certainly. Yeah, I get it. Because that's something that I didn't do for because in my cozy, because it was very limited in a few
mhm,
places, and I realized as I expand the story and more places, I'm trying to incorporate more places in this town. I'm like, eventually I'm going to need a map, and I
mhm,
draw one only because I have to keep straight where, like, what the streets are called, because I forget like
yeah,
what street was the library on again, or
yeah,
and I know where kind of things are relative to one another, but I haven't, like, sometimes think like, oh, I gotta come up with a street name, and I'm trying not to use the actual street names from the town, but kind of suggestions of the town.
sure, sure.
So I'm like, oh, scrambling. So I got this like legal pad, and I'm like always drawing out this map. I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, where's the town? And okay, so if by the last book, I plan on having finally the map of Juniper, so everyone can know where everything is.
sure.
Yeah.
I think y'all end up just throwing that map in the last book too, and adding it later on, especially since that's when the whole world or that whole area on the map is
Yeah,
going to be healed by that book.
right, exactly. Yeah, you need that. Is there an aspect of your world that you like the most?
One of the places, and I had the most fun writing it. I think that's why it sticks out to me. There's a wooded area that's almost like they're not, I'm trying to think actually if it compares to anything, because I guess the um, Avatar movie, how they lived in the trees essentially.
Oh, right, with the floating rocks and things like that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's the closest comparison. It's pretty poor, but there's a group of people that live within the trees, and the protagonist meets them, and they're pretty closed off from the rest of the country because they don't really delve into magic. They don't know too much about it. They can't use it. So they've always just, their people have lived in the woods and built these huts in the trees and everything. So she ends up meeting them and working with them to defeat one of these demon creatures that is attacking their woods. So building their world, just because it was so different, that really sticks out, because the rest of it is pretty normal by the book standards, pretty normal
Mhm.
environment and towns. But you get to that and it's sort of like, oh, this is very primal. This is very different than what we had been reading. So that sticks out to me the most.
Oh, nice. Is there an aspect of your world that you like the least?
I wouldn't say that I like any the least. I would say
Okay.
that I haven't just taken the time to explore. So one of the places, there's a fishing city along the coast to the south that I mentioned a few times, but it's nothing special really. It's just,
Okay.
oh, there's a town. There are these people from here. These people have passed through, and that's about it. So I think
Mhm.
I could really expand on that a lot more. But again, when the plot doesn't take place in those locations, you just sort of forget them, or they get brushed to the side.
Sure.
And
Right.
again, that's something to work on with world building in the story, making sure that these places are addressed and they're given attention so that they stick out in your mind as you're reading.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Um, let's talk about your characters and how you create and develop them, because your fiction is character driven. So what was your process when you came up with these characters and how you created them?
A lot of the characters I shouldn't say that I base them on people, but I take different characteristics that I'm familiar with from myself and from people that I'm close to. So, for example, my protagonist, when I started writing, she was around my age, so I kind of could share her mentality a little bit. But I know for a fact I took a lot of characteristics from my husband, as far as the determination. Her kind of headstrong willingness to go in and help, and things like, I have to say the good things about him in case he listens to this, but in case I
Yeah, he
take
should
something.
subscribe. Right.
Oh yeah, yeah. um, but there's another character that I know I put my own personality into a little bit more, as far as the sense of responsibility, taking on tasks to help other people, things like that. Of course, I have to say the good things about myself that I put
Sure.
in. Like, I
Right.
can't say the bad things. Um,
That's great.
but I think I get a lot of that, the personal aspects, into there when I develop the characters, because you want them to be different than each other, obviously,
Mhm.
but you don't want it to be almost like a caricature.
Sure.
Um, and that's, I think a lot of people struggle with that, because you read it and they're either black or white. They're either
Right.
uh, just the most annoying person, and then they get, the development right away, or they're just kind of bland and there's no development. You can't expect where the development's going to go. For example, I have a character. He's a botanist. He's a young botanist, and he can't use magic or anything, but he is inexperienced with combat. He's not a fighter or anything like that. So in the first few books, he's very timid. He's very he doesn't approach conflict, and so he learns how to fight so that he can protect himself. Well, then later in the series, he actually goes kind of on his own adventure to combat some of the trouble that's going on in a different country. So you do have that room for development, but you almost have to put your head into their body and say, okay, if I'm them right now, how are they going to think? How are they going to react to this? How are they going to behave in these certain situations?
Mhm. Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and that's a big story arc change for that character, from a botanist to a fighter, going off to another country. That's pretty awesome. Which of your characters would you most like to have a drink with?
Probably there's the master mage, who is he's one of the protagonists, but he acts as a mentor for the main protagonist. Her name is Cora and his name is Byron. And he's a dark master mage, and he ends up taking on all of these different responsibilities in order to protect his students. And then he ends up becoming a big part of the King's Council and sort of helping them with the conflicts that arise. And so I think it would be really interesting to kind of pick his brain about how he approaches different situations, or he likes his drinks in the book too. So, it'd probably just be a fun time to begin with. But I think we would get along the best, and we really relate to each other the most.
That's great. It's really satisfying when characters take on a life of their own, in a way, when you because you're creating. Oh, I lost you. Oh, there we are.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Because you're making these characters out of your imagination and what you intend them to be, and sometimes they kind of take a life of their own. Like they end up you kind of know what they're gonna say, even though you kind of start them off. You like kind of get them in a direction, but they kind of do their own thing, and that's like a really wonderful kind of a moment. And it just, when these characters become real for you, because then some of them become like really fun to write, because of that. And then do you find yourself like wanting to put characters together who wouldn't be together? Excuse me, just to see what would happen.
Sometimes, yes. A lot of it has been established already. In the second book, a lot of I have eight characters in sort of the circle, besides the two I would consider them more of the protagonists. But they do interact in different situations, and I think it's really fun when you have a series and not just I've talked to a lot of authors who do one or two books, and that if that's how you approach it, that's great. But I personally, just having more than one or two books, and you get to explore those different relationships, especially as time goes by, because my series takes place over like 5 or 6 years. So you get to see them go from being, these young adults or new adults to actual adults in their 20s, 30s, and how they do interact, how their relationships do develop, because there are a couple of romantic relationships, two of them with two of those main characters, and it just works because you don't have to rush anything. You don't have to force them to behave a certain way just to meet meet your deadline or make ends meet, however you want it to end up. One of the relationships that I'm probably most proud of writing is the female protagonist. Cora is just she's headstrong, but she's also very proud person. She's a good fighter. She's a powerful mage, but she kind of thinks she owns the world because of that. And so she ends up meeting an assistant general, and they fight, and they just kind of have this bitter relationship to start out with. Well, by this book that I'm in right now, they kind of have a breakthrough, and you just sort of see how their relationship has developed into something that is based on loyalty between the two. So you have that time to develop them.
Was that something that breakthrough in the relationship? Was that something that you intended from the get-go, or did it kind of come to you like, this seems like an organic, as things are progressing, this is an organic progression of the relationship?
It really did become that organic because I knew they wanted to be friends, but until you actually write the dialogue and you write the scenes that they're in together, um, you learn how much they care about each other, um, what they would do and what they would say for each other, and those relationships. So you talk about the characters sort of coming to life. Well, in a way, they do. As you're writing them, you realize, oh, like they do get along. Okay, oh, that does sound good. And then you look back on the older books and think, oh wow, this I never would have guessed, or this really developed into something special.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yes, that's something I'm looking forward to over the course of time with my series as well, is what's going to happen in book 4 and to these characters now. The things that, because the change that happens to the characters in book 1, you experience that in book 2. Like, we're going to see how their lives are changed and what's going on with them. Is this change has made them better people or something? And by book 4, a lot more people are going to be affected by this pushing out of their uncomfortable zones.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. I have no idea what's going to happen, but we'll find out. I have, I can only focus on one book at a time. Do you ever do any research for your books? I know fantasy lends itself to, we talked a little bit about that. You use the research with fiction, traditional fiction, but sometimes with fantasy, you can make it up wholesale. And a friend of mine who writes fantasy because she doesn't want to do any research at all. So, but do you do research for your books? And if so, what kind?
Sometimes a lot of the research comes from the military or army numbers or proper terms to use, just because that's something I'm not familiar with. And you wouldn't think that it would matter until someone points it out and says, well, that wouldn't make any sense. There's a battle between the kingdom, and I didn't have any idea about numbers. I'm like, oh, there might be a couple hundred people there. And as I was reading it to my husband, he said, there's only a couple hundred for like this whole entire country. That, like, I don't think you understand what what it's supposed to be or what the terms are and things like that. So I think having that feedback is so important, just because there are things that you might not think about, or that you might have a different term for. So that's one of the places where research was necessary, just to look and make sure that the terms were correct and that the numbers were correct, and everything lined up in a way. And you can be a little loose with some of the terms, I suppose. I talk about how the kingdom has generals that lead these different groups, and I just break it down very simply. So they're, generals, their assistants, and then I have everyone else below that. So you can make whatever you want it to be, but obviously you want to make it as accurate as you can when talking about the numbers and supervising however many soldiers and mages and things like that.
Yeah, you can make up any term that you want to use for that role, and I think as long as the system works, as long as it's consistent within itself, I think that's part of the fun with fantasy, is just coming to accept something as reality. Like, these horses can turn into trees. Okay, or whatever. Right? It's like, yeah, sure, okay, I'll accept that. That's just kind of part of what the kind of wonder about it. You just like, yeah, why not? Hobbits, yeah, of course they have big feet. So no, that's good. That's good. Do you have a favorite time of day to write?
Oh, definitely. I'm a morning writer. I'm more active and productive in the morning anyway, just because I think after I wake up, your brain's ready to go. And then once I sit down and go, I can just write all morning. But after that, for some reason, you eat or you eat supper or you work out, and then you sit down and you just, I'm comfortable. I'm tired now.
Right.
I'll get to it a different time.
Sure.
So definitely mornings
Yes.
are the best.
I find myself a morning writer as well because of those same reasons. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'll be really excited and I'll write till like lunch, to like 1 o'clock, and I'm like, oh, I gotta have some lunch, and then after I eat, I'm like, do I really want to go back? Right? Yes, I completely get that. Um, when you write, do you have any particular? Do you like listen to music or have distractions like television, or do you need it silent? And if you do listen to music, what kind do you listen to?
I think it depends a lot on the situation. Um, because I will sometimes listen to music to set the mood. So I've talked about how if I am building a scene and that's in my head already, I'll listen to music to kind of, again,
Mhm.
to make me feel whatever sparks that emotion. So
Yeah.
I have a very diverse playlist of just music. So I like soundtracks from video games or movies.
Hmm.
I'll use that. Sometimes I'll listen to rock or metal music if it's
Hmm. You got a battle
intense.
coming up. You want to put on some Slayer. I get it, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. It depends when I'm coming up with the scene. When it comes to actually sitting down and writing, I don't like to have music on most of the time. If I do, then it would just be something on like a half-hour playlist where you
Hmm.
can just tune it out.
Yeah.
I've found that if the TV's on, or if there's people walking in and out of the building, something like that, it just pulls you out of
Hmm.
your focus zone. When I'm editing, a lot of times I'll listen to music just because it helps with making it go a little more fluidly.
Hmm.
If I don't have music, then it's so easy to just stop and overthink a sentence or a
Hmm.
word, and then you lose your concentration. So
Yeah.
in those cases where you just want to see the general overall story, overall paragraph or chapter, then I think music helps get your mind into that
Yeah.
space.
And in the editing, depending on the parts of the process, the creative process, whether drafting is a different animal than revision than it is with editing, than proofreading. And no, I totally get it. And I'm very much similar to you. The different types of music I listen to, I got about 7 or 8 thousand tracks on my writing playlist, and depending on the genre that I'm writing. So with the cozy mystery, one of the things I have in the town, there's a character who is an autistic is a young man, maybe a late teenager, who plays 30s music because he loves music from the 30s. Because I love music from the 30s, so I thought I want a little radio station in this town.
Yeah.
And so I'll put on Lionel Hampton or other music from the 30s. Nope, no words. I just want music. And Lionel Hampton's a vibraphone player, and I just love that. So that kind of puts me in this kind of a happy place that kind of keeps us almost like this sense of anachronistic feel where the town's kind of, I won't say stuck in time, although that could be work with the theme, but there are elements where it's like the gas station has pumps that were there from the 1970s, and there's that phosphate shop that's been there forever, and that's just part of the charm. I think that these pieces are there and they don't necessarily need to change, and so that music kind of helps me get there.
Yeah.
And like when I wrote my pulp uh, horror adventure book, it takes place in the early 30s. It's my homage to the Phantom. I don't know if you're familiar with that character. That's an early pulp hero who lived in this jungle and was an adventurer, fought pirates. A really cool character. And so my pulp horror homage takes place on and near Haiti in the 1930s. So I wanted voodoo and zombies and things like that. So I found voodoo music to listen to. And
Wow.
I just listened to that for a month, just incessantly all day,
Yeah.
so much that I worried my wife sometimes.
Oh.
I think you might need to listen to something else. Like, no, I've got 5 more hours of writing I want to do today. But that really helped me get into that feel like I was in that time space. So
Right.
I totally get that need for music as a distraction for part of my brain, which allows the creative part to do what it's got to do. You know,
Mhm.
yeah. How often do you write?
I try and write every day. It'll depend on how I'm doing editing wise. So this past month, I had been doing the final edits for my third book before its release. And I didn't really have any time to write just because I spent so much time going over, the 400 pages, however many pages, with that fine tooth comb and making sure everything made sense. And then you get all the publishing, making sure everything is uploaded and formatted correctly and yada, yada. So I didn't have too much time to write then. But previously, and what I'm getting back into, I try and write 1,000 words a day.
Mhm.
And I will try and edit 3 to 5 pages of
Okay.
what I have completed.
Okay. Yeah, so you're doing both. You're trying to write and edit at the same time. Oh, the same, like different projects, editing one project, writing another.
Yep.
Okay.
Different.
Yeah, I was to say, right. I applaud you for that. I can only focus on one thing at a time, like writing wise, like the drafting and then editing, and it's got to be kind of a complete. But like 3/4 the way into a draft, the next book starts talking to me like, hey, when you gonna start writing me? I'm waiting for you. And I'm like, I'm bored with the book I'm writing. Like, I'm ready for it to be done. Like, I know how it's gonna end. I've played it through 1,000 times in my mind. I just want it over. And it's like, it's not that I resent it, but just like I've told the story so much in my head. Like, I just can't get my fingers to go fast enough. Just tell the thing, tell it. No, that's awesome. That's great. That's funny. Can you tell me how you felt seeing your book in print for the first time?
Oh gosh, it was such a surreal experience. I did things a little differently with my first book because I had gone through a local publisher to help with sort of putting it together and with the editing and the cover design and everything. So they had printed out 50 copies for me. So I got this big box in first of all, and you open it and you just kind of hold it, and it's almost, you just sort of don't know what to do with it because you'd read it so many times, you've seen the cover so many times that you're like, okay, well, here it is. Now what? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And so
it's like giving someone a box of puppies. Like, what?
Right.
Yes.
Right. Well, then you jump into the marketing side of it, which is so much fun and such a learning experience, going to start and to get rid of those books that you have sitting around now, and telling everyone. I never told my family or friends or anything that I was writing until I was just about to publish. And so it came as a surprise to a lot of people, and they were very supportive. So it's just a lot of fun because they all wanted a copy and your signature and everything. So then I went through and got to mail those out. So every time I get a new book in, it just is sort of that surreal, like, oh my gosh, I wrote this. This is okay. Well, now what do I do? Okay, well, on to the next book, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's all those different aspects. The marketing, like, do you ever like do book shows, or how do you find yourself selling your books in person? Is that what kinds of things have you done?
A lot of the marketing, I think a lot of what I've been doing has been limited just because of the pandemic. And I know a lot of people have mentioned in-person events and things like that. And I would like to do those probably within the second half of this year. I thought about going in and being present at bookstores and having them there. But with only, a couple books within the last year, it was sort of, okay, well, let's just get some sort of books out there. Let's just kind of build up your name, build up your presence a little bit. So that's really what I've been doing. And I started out the year pretty strong, pretty hard with that, making up a brand, getting the website all set, getting a link with all of my information on it for social media, getting, TikTok and making videos and just getting your name out there a little bit more. And so now that I have the third book out and hopefully the fourth one out, I'm aiming for the summer, it helps to have that already established a little bit. So I'm hoping to do more in-person events, but a lot of it has just been with family and friends at the moment,
Sure.
and then starting to get it going online.
Yeah, there is something fun to that. I haven't done one since the pandemic. I'm hoping to get out later this year. We'll see. We'll see. You know, right now I don't make any plans. It's
Yeah.
just, but it is kind of amazing when people like look at your books and they decide to buy one, and that, you know, they ask you to sign it or personalize it. There is something very special about that transaction, you know. And sometimes the circuit that I was doing with the group that I was in, they organize events like every week during the year. You can go, you know, 40 some weeks a year. They're doing craft fair shows, all kinds of things. And then I thought this is a really good cross section of people, and people making things. And what I found really kind of exciting or wonderful was that early on I would do shows, and like a few months later I would come back, and the people who had bought my book had wanted to come back, or saw me again. Excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry. Oh, excuse me.
Bless you.
The building. Yeah, this like cold snap we're getting is like wreaking havoc on my sinuses. I can hear it now. Um, they came up to my table and wanted to tell me that they liked the book, and
Oh,
that was just really special. You know, like they
yeah.
don't have to do that. I mean, you know, no one's making them do that. And so I hope you have that opportunity to go out and sell in a public setting and multiple shows and have people there and exciting. It's just it's really rewarding. I hope that you get a chance to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And like you said, it's a crazy time right now. So
Mhm. Certainly,
sort of have
certainly.
to see. Mhm.
Have you ever read your own work like a year or more after you've published it? And if so, what was that experience like?
Oh, well, my first book I published I was January of 2021. So it was a little over a year ago. And I still look back at it. Sometimes I'll just flip open a random page and just read and think, okay, I know exactly what I was thinking when I wrote this. You can kind of pinpoint different parts that you had looked at and where you were and what you were thinking at the time. I had actually gone through it and done a second edit for a second edition of it. And I did the same thing with the sequel as well, just because I had illustrations to add. I had a hardcover version of the second book with illustrations and an illustrated cover, because I had set that up beforehand. So I had been reading through those multiple times last year, and it was just each time again you kind of think of those different details of where you were, and
Mhm.
this is going to get hinted at later, or I think that really helps too when you are later in the series, just as you consider those callbacks. You can look at the details, make sure everything is lined up correctly.
The
And
continuity is important.
Right, and
Yeah.
how you want to plan going forward with different storylines that you had
Mhm.
started.
That's interesting. That you have so much total recall of being in the moment and writing and what you were thinking at the time. Um, you're actually the only person I've asked that question to, who's had that response, which is great. I love that. Everyone else has been like me. But my experience was it was very weird. Like, I know I wrote this because I was the one writing, but I don't recall. I don't remember writing it for the
Oh
most
yeah.
part. Like, I'm looking at these words, like, and some of these passages, like, they catch me by surprise. Like, wow, that's not bad. I'm like, yeah, I know, right? You know? And then I'm waiting for the cringe factor to come in. And when it like doesn't really come in as much as I fear, like, oh God, I don't want to look at this.
Yeah.
And it's not there. I'm like, oh, really? This isn't so bad. You know, that was because I had to, it had been such a long time between my first cozy and my sequel because I'd written 3 other books in between,
Okay.
different genres. Splatter Western, that was my second book. I mean, I had to go from cozy to splatter Western, like to say, look, here's a range. I don't want
Yep.
Kathy Bates hobbling me saying, you better write another cozy, Mr. Man. Um, so I had to say, look, I'm not a cozy mystery writer. The splatter Western's more my thing. Um, but by the time I came back to the sequel, I had forgotten so much about the first book. Like I had forgotten character names and like I know the story, but like so I had to read it again. And I always keep it on my computer. Like when I'm writing, my screen's divided into 3. I've got my outline on the left, my work in progress, my drafting in the middle, and on my right I've got my first book, so I can go back and like search. Like
Oh, that's
what does this person look like, or how does this person talk, or what do they like to wear, you know?
yeah.
Um, but it was a weird experience reading that book, and there were passages and lines that came forth like, God, I don't remember writing that at all. And it was just a very surreal, out of body. It's like when you're dreaming that you see yourself in your dream.
Yeah.
You know, you're floating around here and like you're watching yourself do stuff. It was really, really weird. Just a few more questions here.
Oh, sure.
What is your writer fantasy?
Do you mean
In
as
your
an
ultimate dream
author?
of dreams, if you have a fantasy as a writer, like, okay, I'm a writer, and what's the biggest thing you can fantasize about being a writer, like level of success, or what is it that you want, like your ultimate writer fantasy? This is what it would be.
Oh gosh, I would really like to just be able to um I've had a really good past year, believe it or not. Just because as far as work goes, I've been fortunate enough to work from home. Excuse me. And so a lot of what I had been doing was I'd work throughout the day sporadically when I needed to. And then I'd be able to write in the morning, edit in the morning. I was at home, especially with my husband being in school, taking him up to campus, bringing him home, making dinner and lunch and stuff like that, and cleaning and everything that needs to be done too. Um, I also started doing a lot of ARC reading for different authors, and I really enjoyed that, and being able to review. I did a couple of beta reads too, to critique and give feedback. So that was really fun. I guess that would be ideal as a writer, to where my life would be comfortable enough, it would be stable enough, both emotionally, financially, physically, to where I could just be able to do writing every day, at least a piece. Um, yeah, I think
To be able to make a living, yeah, from that.
it's not something I think about too
Yeah.
often. Well, not even making a living too, just
Mm,
being able to, well, I guess that a lot of that falls on my husband, don't tell him, but
sure. Okay.
um, just being able to have that stability within myself,
Sure.
to where I would feel comfortable. Okay, whether it is in between work, whether it is in between having a family, things like that,
Hmm.
I would be able to make time for writing and make progress on it.
Okay. Yeah. I've always had that, the stories about the writer going to the cabin or the place of isolation to
Yeah.
write, I've always been appealed to me. And I always wanted to be in a lighthouse, like the movie The
Oh,
Fog. And I
yeah.
thought that would be the ultimate, like, even though I always fantasize when the lottery gets to be of some obscene amount, I'm thinking, yeah, I should play $20. And what if I win a half, $500 million? Like, I'm going to build this house with a tower, Oh, it's like
That'd be
yeah,
perfect.
just a lighthouse, just so like I can look out over the lake. And yeah, I'll just have that sense I'm in a lighthouse and no one's going to bother me and I can just write. I know there's something that I find very appealing to that sense of isolation. I guess it'll tell me like, okay, Mark, you got no excuses now. You better start putting
Right.
out, Yes. Um, what advice would you give to anyone who wants to write?
My biggest piece of advice has to be to just write for yourself. You see a lot, especially in the market, when talking about making money or getting picked up by an agent or a publisher, you're getting all these big name authors, and a lot gets tweaked in that whole process. Whether it's the cover, whether it's through the editing, whether it's through the plot or the characters, whatever it may be, a lot of times you'll hear different feedback or criticism, constructive or not, where people want you to add. I mean, we just talked about it with the relationships and, and the characters.
Right.
People will give their opinions. They'll tell you what they want to hear. And if you give into a lot of that, you're going to lose what was originally yours. And so I think for a lot of people who picked writing up as a hobby, it just is so important not to lose that sense of self in your writing. So you write when you want to write, you write what you want to write. You should obviously be doing research and learning more about the whole process, whether it is publishing, editing, or just general writing, but never lose your sense of self when you're writing. Never forget why you started writing.
That's good advice. That's like one of the few things I take from Stephen King, because he essentially says the same thing: write for yourself. It doesn't matter who your audience is or your editor, anybody, publisher, right? You got to make yourself happy. And at the end of the day, most of my academic writing I had done was always for some further end. So when I started writing movie scripts first and then long fiction, it was about, I want to make myself happy. I want to just, and that happiness came about on my second book, because it was finally, I think, the first time I felt truly free as a writer. Like, I am saying everything I want to say in the way that I want to say it. And I wasn't, not that I didn't enjoy writing the cozy mystery, because I found that as a challenging, but I also really kind of found the genre rather charming. And it was an exercise that I'm writing something there's no one to get their head cut off. There's like nothing horrible here, and so that as a writer was like really exciting in a way, to write about things I would never have written about before, people in touch with their emotions and doubt and all these like real life stuff,
Yeah.
But no, I totally get that. And once you've done that sense of writing because you're writing for yourself, you don't ever want to like stop or go back, so like, I agree. That's good advice. We've talked about your work in progress. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you're working on? So the Roy will be like, I'm not us. I mean, everybody listening, watching.
Sure. Well, currently I just finished publishing the third book this past week, and I'm going to start editing the fourth book. I have the fourth and the fifth and about half the sixth written. So I'm trying to finish, my goal for the year is to finish writing the sixth book, and I'm debating on whether to continue it. I think that's a hard part as an author, is learning when to end it and to let them go and live their own life. So for right now, it's just writing the sixth book, getting that series pretty much wrapped up for the most part. And then I'd like to continue on with a different story within the fantasy genre. I have a couple of ideas. I'm debating whether or not to start. Two of them involve shapeshifters. And so that could be a little fun. It would be something different than what I have been writing. Another one would be a little relatable to the current series that I'm writing, where it would be a separate fantasy world with a little less, fire magic involved, things like that, like straight up magic. A little bit more with different races and creatures, and diving down that road and working on that open world, and crafting an open world.
I like that. The shapeshifters, are they like lycanthropes? Are we talking werewolves, or can they shape into other things? Or do you know? Or do I? I don't want to spoil anything. If there's a secret.
So the one idea I had actually would have to do more with an android type creature, where it would, and again, I'm still kind of fuzzy on the detail. I haven't considered it too much. But one of the things they would be able to do is shapeshift into just generally any animal. The second idea would be something sort of like lichens, where it would be almost a dual personality of a character where they would just be able to shift into one animal. So there are lichens, there are family that would turn into wolves, and then there's one of the characters would turn into a cougar, one of them an eagle. So just kind of one
Yeah.
specific shapeshift idea. I think I could
Okay.
have a lot of fun talking about how the transformations would go, and that one would be a little more romantic relationship based.
Right.
If I do want to, cave in and delve into that, but like you said, it might just
Yeah.
happen sometimes when you dive into what you don't enjoy reading, and
Yes, it kind of happens
you never know.
sometimes. Right. Yeah, I recommend the movie Lady Hawk if you've not seen
Okay.
it or heard of it. It's a fantasy movie from the 80s. It involves characters they turn into animals.
Okay.
They're lovelorn. They love each other, but they can't be together because one turns into an animal in the daytime and one turns one into the night. So
Oh,
it's
that's
yes,
interesting.
yeah. So that's
Lady
something
Hawk.
that
Okay.
Lady Hawk, right?
Okay.
You might enjoy that. Is there anything else you would like to promote?
I don't think, I guess I can plug myself a little bit. I do have
Sure.
a newsletter I started this year I'm developing. So if anybody's interested in following along with what I'm working on, I also put different aspects of my writing into it. So I should come up with a name, like an author's corner, some sort of name for it, but
Yeah.
just kind of behind the scenes changes that I've made. If scene turned out differently or a character turned out differently, I'll make a note of that just to show people different fun facts about the series and how it developed and
Oh,
changed.
I like that.
Uh,
I like the aspect. Saying this is my original idea, and it might change. I could
Right.
see readers loving that.
So I do have a newsletter that goes out monthly. I do have a website, lillardbooks.com, where you can sign up for that. I also have the illustrations posted on there, excerpts available for all 3 books, as well as their summaries. And I'm on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. So anybody can find me there. I post a lot of different, I'm sure you've seen, I post a lot of different memes and different clips and reels and things like that, just to keep up and keep people entertained.
Nice. And is that where we can find your books on your website, or where else can we find them?
I have a link in my bio for Instagram and TikTok that will take you to where they are available. They're available on Barnes and Noble and Amazon are the 2 major realtors that I recommend, and they're available digitally. They're available on Kindle Unlimited and the physical and hard and soft cover
Oh,
available. Mhm,
the hardcover is a nice option that KDP is doing.
mhm.
And
That's pretty nice.
yeah, I was in the beta program for that. Mine didn't turn out so
Good.
great, so I didn't think I would probably do it, but I think things have tweaked, been changed in that program. But it's still a nice option, maybe to get maybe 5 or 10 very special books, like to give to your readers or something, very
Yeah.
special, because
Yeah.
they're a little pricier, but it's nice.
Mhm.
So, Courtney,
Good.
I want to thank you for being on the show today. This has been a real pleasure to get to know you and to learn all about your writing and your characters and your worlds. And this was great fun. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Mark. I appreciate learning about your world too. It's always interesting hearing about a different genre author and how they come up with the stories and their writing process too.
Oh, thank you. It's been great, and I'll be happy to share anything if you're up for a book swap. I would be happy to send some stuff to you, and if you have something you'd like to send, you're more than welcome. That'd be nice. I always like reading other people's work too. I can't always get to it. Life's crazy and busy, and
Oh yeah.
but it's just nice to know, like, yeah, I've got a free day. I want to go check this person's work out. Just to kind of look through it.
Sure. Oh, that sounds great.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm gonna do my commercial and then we'll get out of here.
Sure.
You've been watching and listening to Between the Lines. You can listen to us on unsaneradio.com, listen to full episodes, or download to your device. You can watch us on our YouTube page, Between the Lines Podcast. That's where you're at right now. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you know someone who would like our show, tell them about us. If you're a writer and would like to join me for a chat, email me at betweenthelines54@yahoo.com. That's betweenthelines54@yahoo.com. And here's my cheesy outro. See you next time, Between the Lines.
I love it.